On This Week in Enterprise Tech, we talk about how Amazon is getting into the low-orbit satellite broadband space. Plus, we talk about whether data center changes are actually pushing cyber risks to the network's edge. Plus, Heather, Curtis, and I talk with Eric Dynowski, CTO of ServerCentral, about cloud migration, disaster recovery, and hybrid cloud. Twiat on the set.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is Twiat, This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 350, recorded July 12th, 2019. DR plans. Yeah, we got that. This episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by Ahrefs. Whether you work for a big brand or run your own small business or do freelance work, getting traffic to your website is always a challenge. Ahrefs is an all-in-one SEO toolset that's here to help and give you the tools needed to rank your website in Google. To get a 7-day trial for only $7, go to ahrefs.com. That's AHREFS.com to sign up. And by Worldwide Technology. Worldwide Technology's advanced technology center is like no other testing and research lab, with more than $500 million of equipment, including OEMs like NetApp. And it's virtual, so you can access it 24/7. To learn more and get insights into all that it offers, go to wwt.com/twit. And by Wasabi Hot Cloud Storage. Thinking about moving your data storage to the cloud? Wasabi is enterprise-class cloud storage at 1/5 the price of Amazon S3 and up to 6 times faster with no hidden fees for egress or API requests. Calculate your savings and try Wasabi with free unlimited storage for a month at wasabi.com and enter the code ENTERPRISE. Welcome to Twiat, This Week in Enterprise Tech, the show that is dedicated to you, the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and that geek who just wants to know how this world is connected. I'm your host, Louis Maresca, your big guide to the big world of the enterprise, but I definitely can't guide you by myself. It's too big of a world. I need to bring in some top enterprise tech professionals in the industry, starting with our very own Mr. Curtis Franklin, senior editor at Dark Reading. Curtis, welcome back. What's been keeping you busy?
Oh, lots to keep busy. I finished up an article on 10 ways to keep a rogue Raspberry Pi from ruining your network security, and been working in the local maker space, putting on a new controller to a really big laser cutter. So plenty to keep me busy, and lots to look forward to on this episode of Twiat.
I'm starting to hear a little bit of Chibert influence on you with the large laser cutters and the IoT devices and so on.
Well, we've got a small laser cutter here at the house, but the one that we're doing over at the maker space has a bed that's about 4 by 5 feet. So we're looking forward to having that capability on hand.
Fantastic. Well, speaking of experts, let's add another expert to our panel. Our very own Heather Williams, lead senior product solutions architect at Ruckus. It's great to have you back, Heather. What's been keeping you busy?
Oh, what hasn't? I got suckered in by all kinds of just bright, shiny objects today, or this week. So I feel like at this point, I'm really glad or I'm hoping my professors in grad school aren't viewers of this, because I'm going to be getting text messages about, oh, that's why you haven't written that paper yet.
Now, are you going to Black Hat this year too?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I'll be there. I'll be there for a week ahead of time.
Maybe I shouldn't have said anything. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't let that out the bag there.
No. They know I have about a 2-week black hole during the Black Hat USA. So, yeah, lots of fun down in Vegas.
Well, I'm looking forward to the coverage because I'm not going this year, so I'm going to have to live vicariously through the both of you. But we'll see. I want to see some good coverage. Well, folks, today we have a really pretty big packed show. We're talking a little bit about satellite broadband providers and whether this new player actually can make a dent in it. Plus, we talk about whether data center changes are pushing cyber risks to the network edge. But before we get to that, we also have after that, we actually have a great guest, Eric Dynowski, CTO of ServerCentral Turing Group, to come talk to us about cloud transformation, security, hybrid clouds, and all that fun stuff. But before we get into all that goodness, let's go ahead and jump into this week's blips. Well, you have your favorite mouse, your keyboard, right? For me, it's my Logitech G10 keyboard with those Cherry MX brown keys, as well as the Logitech MX Master. That's my favorite mouse. But what if I told you that it's possible that your favorite mouse, keyboards, mice, wireless presenters actually suffer from a security vulnerability? Not only can attackers eavesdrop on your keystrokes, but they can infect your host system as well. Now, what do you do? Well, according to the security researchers, this is quite an elegant hack because hackers can simply piggyback on the Logitech wireless connection to infect the system and they communicate over this backdoor. Now, that means that even computers which are not online are actually can be hacked as well. Now, any Logitech device that uses the so-called unifying radial technology is affected. Now, they've been shipping this vulnerability in the unified USB receiver, wireless receiver for keyboards and mouse since 2009. Now, unifying is used across Logitech's project range from inexpensive entry level all the way up to the really current high-end models, including my MX mouse. Now, the vulnerable USB receiver are recognized by that small orange star logo on the receiver itself. Now, some devices actually, you don't have to use that particular thing to still use the device, but most people are actually using that thing. Now, in addition to the wireless gaming products of like the Lightspeed series, wireless presenters like the R500 and Spotlight are affected by this vulnerability. They also are related to the radio technology, both in the presenter R400, R700, R800. However, some of them are not affected to the vulnerability. So you have to go in the article, check it out, see which ones are actually affected. Now, unfortunately, most are suffering from a previously discussed issue as well as called mouse jack. So you have to also check to see if your devices have been updated and not vulnerable to that. Now, the vulnerabilities actually allow an attacker to eavesdrop on keystrokes from wireless keyboards. Everything an infected user types, from emails to passwords, is actually readily available, but it gets even worse. An attacker can send any command to the victim's computer if a vulnerable Logitech device is installed, and that makes it easy to infect the computer with malicious code without the rightful owner actually noticing that. Now, what can you do to actually protect your favorite device? Well, first, make sure that the latest firmware is installed on the device. Now, unfortunately, Logitech's unifying receivers will actually remain vulnerable after the situation, even after all the updates have been applied. Now, Logitech actually strongly advises that, quote, a computer should always be kept away from strangers that they cannot have physical access to or manipulate it. Also, users should take common security measures to make it more difficult for others to access it. However, for me, my MX mouse uses that Bluetooth as well, so I can actually get away from using that wireless adapter and I can switch to that instead, so that actually helps. Also, I guess in this case, we have to go back to that hard and fast rule: keep your devices up to date and try and use wired technology more. Cheers.
Well, financial firms are seeing serious threats from their employees' mobile devices. According to a new report, financial services organizations experience higher rates of phishing and man-in-the-middle attacks via mobile devices than do other industries, and technology trends are making the issues even more thorny. According to the Financial Services Mobile Security Report published by Wandera, phishing attacks, which have hit 57% of organizations in financial services compared to 42% across all industries, and man-in-the-middle attacks, which hit 36% in financial services compared to 24% in all industries, illustrate the problems we're talking about. And the problems are getting worse. In the UK alone, the number of breaches in the financial services industry increased by 480% from 2017 through 2018. Now, according to the report, targeted phishing attacks are the most serious issues and among the most common. Solving the problem will come down to only giving verified and authorized users access to corporate resources from their mobile devices, and then doing so only if those devices have been proven to be trustworthy at the time the request is made.
Teach a man to spot a fish. A new report in Dark Reading talks about the ongoing efforts that companies are making to thwart phishing attacks and how it starts with employee awareness and training, an ounce of prevention and all of that. Unsurprisingly, the latest annual Beyond the Phish report from Proofpoint indicates that users continue to be our weakest links. More than 100 million responses were recorded over the course of 2018. In addition to using simulated phishing attacks, users were also questioned on 14 different topics. And the results reflect an ongoing struggle with being able to identify phishing threats and understanding compliance-related cybersecurity directives. The good news is that one of the categories with the most correct responses was avoiding ransomware attacks. A security awareness and training strategist at Proofpoint says it points to the complexity of these topics and the nuances around phishing, around data protection, and around understanding some compliance directives related to cybersecurity. She explains it's bigger than one decision inside of an email. She describes how users' actions can unknowingly put their employers at risk and exacerbate the phishing threat. Some overshare information on social media, for example. A post saying, "My boss is out of town this week," may seem benign, but it can provide valuable intel for an attacker. More problematic is that attackers continue to up their game and are showing increased sophistication. Trending now is a large increase in brand forgery emails, whose goal is credential harvesting. These are emails disguised to look like they come from legitimate accounts such as Microsoft or Amazon and try to get users to enter credentials onto a fake login page. With these usernames and passwords, they attempt logging into banking websites or webmail accounts. And the dirty secret is that brand forgery is not that hard. Advanced actors know how secure email gateways work and how to bypass them. They use hidden text in HTML-based email. They make the emails more conversational, and they don't use attachments or links. And a recent tweet by Miko of F-Secure was describing a spoofed Google page with subtle changes in the Unicode that shows how even Chrome struggles to give actionable intelligence to users.
Now, Agent Smith is not just a character from the Matrix. It's actually a hacker campaign that could be infecting 25 million Android devices. Now, how are they doing it? Well, it's mostly by third-party apps, and the apps, most of them being games, are actually distributed through a third-party app store by a Chinese group with actually a legitimate business helping Chinese developers promote their apps on external platforms. Now, the malware used in this campaign has been actually embedded in the apps that copy popular apps on the phone, like including WhatsApp and the web browser Opera. It injects its own malicious code and replaces the original app with a weaponized version. Now, using a vulnerability in the way Google apps are updated, it can actually do this. Now, the hijacked apps would still work just fine, which hid the malware from users. Now, armed with all the permission users had granted to the real apps, Agent Smith can actually hijack other apps on the phone to display unwanted ads to the users. Now, that might not seem like a really big problem, but at the same time, security flaws could be used to actually hijack banking, shopping, and other sensitive apps. Now, the group also had 11 apps in the official Google Play Store with a dormant version of Agent Smith, which actually could have been triggered into action by a banner ad containing the keyword infect. Now, the apps which have been removed from the Google Play Store have been downloaded over 10 million times. Now, it sounds like Google needs a better set of gates implemented before they actually allow apps into their Google Play Store. Now, Google already fixed at least one of the Android exploits used by Agent Smith, named Janus. Now, other fixes are coming soon. And the question here is now which apps can you actually trust on the Android platform? Now, follow those same steps at keeping the device up to date, but also ensure that you really just install the apps that have been field tested and are indeed verified to not be malicious. Now, especially don't trust ones that are installed via a third-party store and that don't check whether the apps are signed. Either case, what do we always say? Keep your apps and your device up to date.
Well, there's a new ransomware attack out there, and it's targeting QNAP, network-attached storage devices. The operators of this malware appear to be gaining access to the devices either by brute forcing weak credentials or by exploiting known vulnerabilities in them, but the precise infection vector is still a bit unclear. The ransomware, which has been dubbed eCroax, seems designed for targeted attacks and not just for mass distribution. Hard-coded encryption keys in some examples of the malware that researchers analyzed appeared to have unique decryption keys associated with them, which means that the same decryptor couldn't work for all victims. With eCroax, the threat actor behind it is targeting QNAP NAS devices that people use for backups and file storage purposes. Now, such devices typically don't run antivirus or anti-malware products, which means the ransomware is able to run on them with little risk of being detected. It's unclear whether the operators of eCroix are targeting older QNAP devices or more recent ones, but it's likely that they're scanning the internet for accessible devices. Now, based on the researchers' own internet-wide scans, there appear to be currently a little over 19,000 publicly facing QNAP devices just in the U.S. Want to protect your assets? First thing to do is change your credentials. There's really no good alternative to that, and absolutely no excuse.
And continuing the feel-good theme of our blips today, the persistence of persistent threats. It turns out bad actors know the value of the long con. A report by InfoSight discusses the dwell time, the amount of time a threat spends inside of a network before an organization discovers and removes it, and shows that this has become a significant problem for small and mid-sized businesses. The report is based on more than 300,000 accounts and behavioral logs for malicious activity in companies that have between 99 and 5,000 employees and an annual revenue of up to $1 billion. The average dwell time for persistent threats averaged 798 days, while dwell time for riskware, which is identified as unwanted applications, web trackers, and adware, averaged a whopping 869 days. 60% of the malware that was identified was done by using an antivirus using a generic signature, which means that it doesn't specify what the issue is. And so this is also why SMBs can't always understand the difference between high and low priority risks, says Chris Garretts, who's co-founder and chief product officer at InfoSight. This also explains why the dwell times are more than 2 years. Some of the active infections residing on the inspected systems were configured to sinkhole domains and pose no immediate threat. But some of these threats are very sophisticated and are engineered not to be detected. The good news? The dwell time for attacks with ransomware averaged 43 days. That's good information for someone making a disaster recovery plan.
Now, people use social networks to stay, social, right? Well, you go on vacation, you want to show everyone a picture of a new thing or a new thing at your job or your workplace, and that's normally how it goes. But what if I told you that being too social as you are, like on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook, or any other places, are actually providing an entry point for hackers to your workplace? Well, hackers are trolling social media from photos, videos, and other clues that can actually help them better target your company on an attack. Now, what are they doing? Well, they're scouring the internet for information and tricking employees into revealing things over the phone or even using disguises to break into your offices. Now, social media posts are a gold mine for details that can actually aid hackers in attacks. Now, what you find in the background of a photo is particularly revealing, from security badges to laptop screens or even Post-its, which have passwords. From a hacker's perspective, you may be surprised to know that 75% of the time that the information is being found is actually coming from interns or actually new hires, because actually the younger generations entering the workforce today have actually grown up on social media. They post more, and internships or new jobs are actually exciting for updates, and they want to share it now. And in the fact that companies often delay security training for new hires until weeks or months after they've started, and you got a recipe for disaster. Now, the interesting part here is knowing the weak points, and that's actually people using hashtags, which actually reveal a ton of information. Like, for instance, pound or hashtag first day or hashtag new job or hashtag intern at some company. Now, posting a photo of you and your office and your friends, whether it's on a lunch break or doing some sort of activity, social activity otherwise, may be revealing more than you imagine. Think about the types of posters or whiteboards that are actually you're sharing ideas on your office. Now, behind me, luckily, I actually wipe them off. Now, a poster about a team softball league or starting soon means you won't be suspicious if a hacker sends you an email with a link to the latest team schedule. Now, in fact, knowing what a company employee badge looks like make recreating one actually really easy. Now, when an employee decides to video blog their entire day at a company, you actually could be hit. The hackers feel like that's a huge jackpot for them. Not only that, but laptop screens reveal the types of security tools and software being used, which can be used to actually tailor an attack by creating custom malware to disguise fake software updates. Now, what is this revealing to you right now? Well, that you and even your personal aspirations on social networks have professional implications as well. All you can do is pay more attention. Well, folks, that does it for the blips. Next up, the bites. But before we get to the bites, we have to thank a really great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that's Ahrefs. Now, what is a challenge for your organization or you when it comes to your website? Getting traffic to it, right? Well, where does most of the traffic come from? You probably already know the answer. Search engines. Now, Ahrefs is the key to helping here. They are an all-in-one SEO tool set, that is here to help you and actually give you the tools needed to actually rank your website on search engines like Google. Now, for example, Ahrefs makes competitive analysis easy. Their tools show you how your competitors are getting traffic from Google and why they're coming. Now, you can see the pages and the content that send to your competitors and the most search traffic. You can also find the exact keywords your competitors are ranking for and which backlinks are helping them rank. Now, from there, you can actually replicate or improve on their strategies. Now, if you're not getting significant search traffic, Ahrefs tools can help find topics worth creating pages or content on. You can easily see estimated search volumes and gauge traffic potential with their Keywords Explorer tool. Now, if you're getting search traffic, data like their top pages reports helps break down which of your pages are actually bringing the most traffic and hopes that you can actually add more content to them. Want to learn more here? Check out their blog or YouTube channel for a step-by-step SEO tutorials. That's a 7-day trial for only $7. Go to Ahrefs to sign up. That's ahrefs.com. And we thank Ahrefs for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, folks, let's go ahead and jump into the bites. Now, we all, this year it's been kind of turning out to be the year of the low orbit satellite. And I'm going to pause because my camera died. Not sure what happened. Sorry, Victor.
So.
Oh, it's all right. We'll go from the call to action and.
Okay. Give me a second. Okay. Is it back?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know why I did that, but let's try to hope it stays. Okay. Call to action. Let me go back. 3, 2. Want to learn more? Check out their blog or YouTube channel for step-by-step SEO tutorials. That's a 7-day trial for only $7. Go to Ahrefs to sign up. That's ahrefs.com. And we thank Ahrefs for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, folks, it's time for the bites. Now, this year has been kind of turning out to be the year of the low orbit satellite broadband systems. If you remember, we actually covered a couple episodes ago SpaceX beginning their deployment to the low orbit Starlink system. Now, SpaceX system actually required FCC permissions to deploy nearly 12,000 low orbit satellites. Now, they aren't the only ones asking for approval here. In fact, the FCC has previously approved requests from OneWeb, Space Norway, and Telestat to actually offer broadband in the United States from smaller numbers of low orbit satellites. Now, guess who is coming to the party? It's only fitting days before Prime Day. Amazon also wants in on some satellite broadband goodness. Now, coming from its subsidiary called Cooper Systems, Amazon is actually seeking government permission to launch 3,236 broadband satellites that would cover nearly all the United States and much of the rest of the world as well. Now, if approved by the FCC, they're actually required to launch 50% of their satellites within 6 years of authorization, and all within the 9 years, unless a waiver is granted. Now, this means that Cooper must be getting ready to launch soon. Now, even the network covers the whole continental U.S. It could also be available in areas that lack cable or fiber access as well. And that we want to get into that in just a minute. Now, Amazon said in April that Cooper's focus is on an unserved and underserved parts of the world. Now, quote unquote, this is a long-term project that envisions serving tens of millions of people who lack basic access to broadband. Now, low orbit satellites should offer much better latency the current satellite systems, potentially making them more viable substitutes to some of the wired broadband networks. While fast wired networks aren't available in any rural areas of America, Amazon told the FCC that it will help close the digital divide by offering fixed broadband communication services to rural and hard-to-reach areas. Now, gateway earth stations are also added here as well. We'll actually connect it to more higher-speed fiber links to global internet exchange points and point-of-presence sites to actually interchange traffic and reduce network hops and latency. Amazon said it will launch 3,236 satellites in 5 phases and start their commercial operations after the first phase launch of 578 satellites. Okay, so I want to bring in my co-host here, starting with you, Heather, because you obviously have the most experience here with some of the spotty internet connections that we have today. Is Amazon have the best opportunity here? Because it sounds like they're doing it in a little bit of a different way compared to what SpaceX is doing, and this gives them a better chance of success. What do you think?
I think that I'm the only one on the show today that has lived a life of satellite connectivity. So I would say I'm cautiously optimistic. Okay. I think that since I do live in a very rural area, and I absolutely love my Prime account and use it almost on a daily basis, much to my husband's chagrin. I would say that I would never bet against Amazon. However, there's still the laws of physics that has to be obeyed. And on one hand, if you don't have connectivity and satellite is the only available option, I'm living evidence that there are ways to jury rig and get around it. The bigger problem that I see is what they are not addressing. They're not talking about what kind of latency that you're going to see, right, and what kind of pricing. And the sad truth, we had Clayton from WISPA a couple of weeks ago when we were talking to him. 96% of the U.S. landmass is classified as being under rural broadband, or what we would think of as being underserved because of being rural broadband. So that's a huge part of the U.S. and a significant percent of the U.S. population without good affordability, because the sad part is also in rural areas, the economy does not support some of the more outrageous prices. And by the way, on average, satellite connectivity costs twice what your high-speed broadband would cost in a suburb, and you're getting, an nth degree of performance comparatively.
Right. So, Chris, I want to throw this to you. Heather brought up a good point. Obviously, they're not showing what it's going to cost. But the interesting thing here is they actually called out that they're going to actually start to sell some of the bandwidth to providers. And do you think this will actually help with the cost? Do you think that they're just waiting to see how many contracts they can get, and that might help with adoption and paying for, getting these things up faster, and then actually seeing how they can get the network up and running?
Well, obviously, if they've got contracts, Amazon's got to have a point of utilization at which they know that they are breaking even and then making money on these things. And I suspect what they would love to do is get existing bulk contracts in place that take them to at least the break-even point, so that all of their direct customers are profit. And if they can do that, then I have a couple of bold predictions. And one of them is that they start selling devices that have this kind of internet connectivity built in. They could call it a Fire Hub or a Fire Sat station, or something like that. Right. Comes with it built in. You buy their device and you get so much connectivity built in. The other is that I can certainly see a situation where they increase the price of Amazon Prime by another $20 a year and bundle in unlimited use of satellite time with that. So I think that much like AWS, what we're going to see is them taking this, using bulk contracts to basically pay for the system, and then using it as part of the enticement to get more people to become part of the Amazon ecosystem for the rest. I think it's a fascinating idea, and I can hardly wait to see how it all turns out.
It's true. Now, Curtis, you brought up a good point. Now, Heather, I want to throw this back to you because they're saying that each Cooper satellite will be able to access 2 gateway Earth stations as part of Amazon's plan to minimize downtime. Now, they also said, quote, customers will always see persistent connection over a standard Ethernet interface in their homes and will be, quote, unaware of switching of satellites, gateways, or routes through the Cooper system, which means this could be good for WISPs here. And could it be maybe that they're actually trying to handle this latency problem as well?
I had a few words for that. Weather-related outages. I mean, there's still the laws of physics, and that includes all of those words that we were supposed to learn in 8th grade science classes. And so I love the fact that that Curtis is so optimistic about it. But he lives in Florida. How often is Florida hit by rainstorms? That's not every day, right? So I can tell you that in a world where most of you guys are used to ubiquitous streaming of Stranger Things, as soon as it drops on July 4th, we were hit by a pretty significant rainstorm, and so. If you were relying on satellite for streaming things like Netflix, what's a girl to do? So I don't care how many ground stations you have, and I'm not really worried about the handoff between satellites. Maybe I should be. What I'm more worried about the fact is that satellite is 23,000 miles into space, and that's the one-way trip. And remember, it's not just the multiple ground stations and the handoff. That's going to solve the jitter problem, and that's not really what our big problem is. Our big problem with most of the apps is not the jitter; it's really the latency. I can give you a half dozen apps that I use every day that just choke when they start seeing 500, 600 millisecond round trip delay. And so it really does become much more of a problem.
Makes sense. Now, Curtis, I want to throw this your last word to you because I think this interesting thing here is it's becoming a pretty crowded space, right? I think we talked about SpaceX. There's a bunch of other companies that are also doing the low orbit satellite stuff. What do you think Amazon's thinking here? You talked a little bit about them going the AWS route and that kind of strategy of getting it adopted. Why do you think that they want to get into this space? What is it in for? What is it going to give them that they don't already have?
Well, the big thing that it gives them that they don't already have is access to all of those people who live in underserved areas. And let's remember, if they prove the concept in North America, which is relatively well served, then all of a sudden they can look at providing similar service to the rest of the globe. You get to parts of Southeast Asia, vast swaths of Africa, some portions of the Western Asia, the Eurasian part of the world, and the availability of broadband is non-existent. People there are typically fortunate to have intermittent cell service that they can use for accessing the internet. So if Amazon could bring all of those people, or not even all, if they could bring some of those people into the Amazon ecosystem, they've got a huge win. I really see this as being a way to get people into the ecosystem. And in that sense, it's a continuation of a battle that we saw 20 years ago around search engines. A lot of our listeners will be too young to remember when the question was whether Google or Yahoo or Vista or one of the other big search engines was going to be the central portal through which you had your entire internet experience. People talked a lot about portals then because that's what they wanted to be. Now, portals turned out to be not such a big thing unless your name is Google, but Amazon would like to be one of those critical portals. You've got Google, you've got Amazon, 2 or 3 others around the world, but each one of them sees billions and billions of potential revenue as from being this gatekeeper, and they're willing to do things like put up satellites in order to get a piece of that revenue.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Well, we'll go ahead and put that one to bed because I think you have a really other good bite here that's talking about how data center change is actually pushing cyber risks to the network's edge. I'll throw it over to you.
Now, this happened largely because of an interview that I had this last week with a company that was, they're involved in power management solutions for data centers. They've done some research and they say that data centers are being pushed to the edge. They're becoming smaller, becoming far more numerous, but as they move toward the edge, they're moving risk to the edge as well. Now, data centers are facing a huge increase in compute demand, while they're simultaneously seeing a precipitous drop in trained IT personnel. You add to that the fact that there are a greater number of data centers because of this push to the edge, and you get an entire scenario that leaves server farms, central storage, and enterprise network stacks more open to cyber attacks. Now, this comes from a report initially done back in 2014 that looks at what the data center is likely to be like in 2025. In the original report, one of the things that they highlighted was that only 56% of those responding to the survey said that they thought that they would still be in the industry by 2025. And retirement is the biggest reason for them thinking that they would be leaving. Now, as the update to that report, which came out last week, shows the problem is really quite large. We've had a well-documented shortage of skills in cybersecurity going back years. And now that's in the context of a shortage of skills in IT operations overall. And so what does this mean as we're going to the edge? Now, in this context, edge computing is computing that's been pushed closer to users and devices rather than everything coming from a central location or even a central cloud. Among the organizations who already have some sort of edge site or expect to have them, more than half expect the number of edge sites they support to grow by at least 100% between now and then, with a fifth of the companies responding expecting a 400% or more increase. Now, overall, they said that they expect the total number of edge computing sites to grow 226% between now and 2025. Now, there are all kinds of complications here because you add to this something else. I mean, you've got this growing gap between the need and the skills. So that's making things like automation and machine learning and machine intelligence more important for managing all of the infrastructure pieces. I mean, we've seen it in things like software-defined networking, in various AI bases for applications. But now we're talking about machine learning and device intelligence in areas like power management, which is a big deal for data centers and large compute environments. It's more complicated because I asked the question, what about the connectivity? Do people consider the security implications of having their electrical control systems constantly connected? And the answer was absolutely. And in fact, companies are denying their vendors the ability to have this constant connection precisely because of the security implications. It's a lot of conflicting priorities coming together to make life really, really complicated for the people whose job it is to build and manage these data centers and the total enterprise application delivery infrastructure. So let me ask my co-hosts. Lou, you deal with applications of all sorts. Why do you think so many companies are trying to get the computational piece of the puzzle closer to the end user?
You know, it's interesting because there's this whole concept of edge computing, and the idea here is they want to be able to bring both the offline, the online experience to the customer. And nowadays, when you're piping data to a low latency server that's doing, distributed computing at low latency and then producing the response back to the customer, that can't be brought to a kind of offline scenario where, let's say you're driving in a remote area and you need some data to produce computation, or you need a system to produce computation. And so that's why they're bringing it more closer to the edge so that they can bring the value downstream to the customer and get it closer to them so that they can actually take advantage of this both online and offline scenarios. And I think this also helps for the kind of the on-prem versus the in the cloud scenarios as well. But mostly it's because of the online, offline, because we know that the connectivity is not always going to be there. It's not always be consistent. And so it makes it easier to understand that if you have the power to do it at the client layer, then you should do it, because then that means that it brings it more downstream. Now, that also adds some complexity to the system as well, because now you're talking about, hey, we're going to keep the data on the system. We're going to put all of our secret sauce maybe and all of our computational power on the client, which means now you're more susceptible to other things, right? And so I think, but also the same sense, you're not also pushing data to the cloud, so it becomes potentially a security advantage as well. So, I'm really wanting to see how the market starts to adopt this, because I think there's many different facets of the market that can benefit from this, especially when it comes to machine learning and AI and applications for that. But again, I think it's really just so it can bring it closer to the customer and be in those scenarios.
Well, I've got a follow-up that we're going to ask, but before I do, Heather, I want to turn to you, because it seems to me that this has some implications in terms of networking as well. We've all, for the longest time, we've seen the big emphasis on fatter pipes, bigger bandwidth connections, being what we tend in the industry to call north-south connections. The connections that take you from your computer to the next one upstream, to the next one upstream, to the next one upstream. But as you're moving the computation closer to the edge, all of a sudden these east-west connections, it seems to me, become much more important. Have you begun seeing that? And do you think that I'm overthinking it? Or are we really going to have to think about some of these east-west connections if we're starting to shove the data and computing power out to the edge?
I'm laughing because it's almost an unfair question. You're asking the Wi-Fi engineer what she thinks about edge compute. I live at the edge, right? So for me, the network starts at the south and pretty much stays there. I only go north. I tell people all the time that my husband's also a network engineer, so I married up the OSI layer and have done pretty well with that. So I have, instead of a honeydew, he has a server do list. So I can give a pretty concrete example of where east-west is much more of a concern. As you're bringing not just the computational, but the storage in order to keep as much off of that backhaul pipe. For example, if you're in a rural area and you need to have as much cached locally as you can, or you're in a a more or less air-gapped type network where you're only allowing certain traffic to go north. I'm actually, this is going to segue nicely into our guest because I really want to talk about cloud computing and security there. But yes, it has to do, and certainly when I'm designing a Wi-Fi network, it does impact greatly because it used to be that you just needed to worry about, 90% of the traffic was downlink as everybody is streaming your Netflix. But now it depends on the actual use of the network. There was just a really good podcast about Ekahau. A good friend of mine, Jim Palmer, was talking about not all high density networks are designed the same. And so if you're in an environment like a conference, you could end up with actually a lot more of your traffic being uplink versus downlink at different times, and designing for those networks, uplink, downlink, and then side to side, or you're having to cache and move traffic just within the local part of the network differently. And certainly with Wi-Fi, you have the additional complexity of, the laws of physics that come into play to make our lives so much fun.
Well, it sounds like, this is obviously something that you've thought about. And Lou, I want to come back to you with one more question. We've sort of talked about it from a couple of different aspects, but I'm curious, you live in the world of developing applications. And if you're thinking about building applications for the last decade at least, we've looked at sort of a cloud model. But if you're going to have all of these applications distributed out to edge centers and edge devices with what I'm going to assume is central data stores for enterprise data, that's going to have to still be centralized unless you're going to have massive synchronization going on. Does that have implications for the way you actually build the applications that are going to be used in an enterprise?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think nowadays a lot of people are building, mobile phone apps and, SPA, single page applications, and different types of applications. They're architecting them in a way where they are like fairly dependent on online services. So whether it's for data or it's for computation. And so when you say, okay, well, now let's go move to edge computing, a lot of that means that you have to go to the older model that I like to say older model, but not necessarily the older model. It's more of the original model that people used to develop, which is the rich client model, the model where the client does synchronize data down. It does pull down metadata and data down to the client and does the computation there, does the UI there, it does the UX on there. And so this way you can have this offline scenarios, these kind of low connected, no connected scenarios on the client. And then when you are connected, you get more capabilities, you get more data interaction, you get more search capabilities, so on and so forth. And so that means that does have implications and costs to the way you architect the app, what it costs to put the app together. It's like, oh, you're going to spend money on mobile engineers and as well as desktop engineers to go build these things and make them more rich and more inclusive, or are you going to spend more just the web and that side of things? So it's really all about cost and how you want to actually have the experience be. But I definitely say that it's really tough to architect an application that can work in both scenarios, and it costs a lot.
Well, as with most things in the enterprise, it's not free regardless of which way you go. From what I'm hearing, talking to companies around the industry, edge computing and the movement to the edge is something we're going to be talking about for a long time to come. It's nice to get this conversation started. Well, the conversation has to end now because we've got a great guest coming up. Lou, back to you to move us to the next part of Twiat.
Thanks, Curt. Well, before we get to our great guest, we do have to thank another great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that's Worldwide Technology. Now, WWT began building their super advanced technology center, ATC, 10 years ago, and it was really grown exponentially. It's really like no other testing and research lab out there. Now, the lab contains more than $500 million in equipment from hundreds of OEMs, ranging from heavyweights like NetApp, Dell EMC, VMware, to actually emerging disruptors like Expanse, Titanium, and Equinix. The lab contains more than $500 million and it's really kind of expanded since then. Now, WWT is a trusted partner who stays with you over the years. Many of their customers have been with them for over a decade because they really know that they can go to them to get the answers they need for their business so it runs right. Now, their ATC is an incubator for IT innovation and offers hundreds of on-demand integrated solution labs representing the newest advanced in flash, hyper-converged infrastructure storage, hybrid cloud analytics, infrastructure automation, data protection, and more. Now, learn about products before you launch because WWT's engineers use these environments to quickly spin up proofs of concepts and pilots using their sandbox so customers can confidently select the best solutions. Now, in many cases, this actually reduces concept time from months to weeks, which actually increases your speed to market. And they offer lab as a service. It's a dedicated lab within their ATC. Now, here, customers can actually perform programmatic testing using really the vast ecosystem of technology that WWT actually has built. And it's virtual, so you can actually take advantage of the ATC's unique benefits anywhere in the world, 24/7. Now, WWT engineers work in these labs every day. They beta test new equipment. They're building reference architectures and custom integrations to actually help their customers make decisions and see results faster with much less investment. Now, later this summer, WWT will be launching a new digital platform with hands-on access to more than 200 lab environments. To learn more about WWT, the ATC, and sign up for pre-launch access to the new on-demand lab platform, go to wwt.com/twit. WWT simplifies the complex. That's wwt.com/twit. WWT, delivering business and technology outcomes around the world. And we thank Worldwide Technology for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, folks, it brings it to my favorite part of the show. We get to bring in a guest to drop some knowledge on the Quiet Riot. Today, we have Eric Dynowski, CTO of ServerCentral Turing Group. Eric, welcome to the show.
Hey, glad to be here. Nice to see you guys.
Absolutely. So now our audience really loves to hear, the origin stories, people's journey through tech. Can you maybe take us through your journey through tech and what brought you to ServerCentral?
Sure. So my journey started probably, 20 years ago as a teen, and I got lucky and landed a job at a pharma company and kind of grew up there in the data center with networking servers back in the 90s. And then moved on to the financial services industry, which was a lot of fun, running infrastructure and building software for them, high frequency trading, networks, things like that. And then in 2013, we got the crazy idea, my business partner Brendan and I, to leave the financial services industry and start our own company focused on providing consulting and professional services around public cloud, specifically AWS. So we did that in 2013, grew really quickly, faster than probably we could handle, and then merged with ServerCentral late last year in December of 2018, and have been kind of rocking it since then. So.
Fantastic. Well, it sounds like you've been in the industry a long time. Now, cloud services have really kind of become the big thing. The industry's focused on them. They're focused on cloud native app development, moving to the cloud, that kind of thing. Now that we have AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, and more, what are some of the challenges organizations are seeing here? Obviously, we know that some organizations are moving to the cloud or they want to build on the cloud. What are they doing? What are they challenged with?
Wow, that's a huge question. The challenges are many, and they sort of run the gamut from political, cultural, technological, business-oriented challenges, things like that. And I think lots of things contribute to that as well. The whole space has evolved really quickly. The major public cloud providers originally were just focused around infrastructure products, meaning, hey, I just want to spin up some servers or instances within the cloud, and I need a little bit of storage. And it's quickly evolved to, machine learning services, gaming services, mobile services, machine learning, robotics, even Amazon, relevant to the discussion we're having today about satellite, now has, ground stations as a service that you can get. So I think organizations have struggled to keep up with that and adopt and also keep up with the rapidly evolving technologies available within those areas. People are looking at cloud native apps. If you look at that, there's probably hundreds of different companies and products that have come out in the last 2 to 3 years. So the challenges are many. Governance is a huge problem. You can sign up for a lot of these services with a credit card, and we've run across large enterprises that discover they have 50, 60 public accounts within the cloud service providers, and they don't even know how they got them or got there, because employees are signing up for accounts and consuming services. Security is a huge issue as well, because just anybody can open up an account on top of the public cloud providers. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're well versed in what is the best way to set those things up, what is the most secure way, and what's the most compliant way to do it. So yeah, it's an interesting space at the moment.
Now, let's focus a little bit closer on one part of the market. There's obviously this kind of concept of private clouds versus the concept of hybrid clouds. What trends are you seeing here?
I think there's a huge push at the moment, especially within the enterprise segment, to move more towards hybrid clouds. And what I mean by that is not just being split between, say, on-prem and one of the major hyperscalers like Amazon, Azure, or Google, but being split between on-prem, colocation, private cloud, Amazon, Azure, and Google, and maybe even some second, third tier providers as well. So that's created an interesting scenario, because a lot of these providers also have proprietary services that are not easily movable. So a lot of people went into, say, AWS, for example, and maybe started using some of their proprietary services and then want to go cloud native or in a hybrid scenario where they can run between service providers. And all of a sudden they find they have workloads that are not simply movable. So I think the two trends are moving more towards hybrid solutions. And we can talk about some of the reasons for that. But that in turn has resulted in, I think, a fairly significant move to building applications that are cloud native, that are easily portable between all these different platforms.
Makes sense. I think you brought up a good point. Let's actually jump into that. Why are they moving to these hybrid solutions?
Sure. I would say that the answer for that is, well, the short answer is it depends. There's a lot of different reasons. Yeah, of course, right. There's a lot of different reasons why you might want to go hybrid. One is maybe you don't want to be locked into a single provider. So, maybe you don't want to be tied into Google specifically for some reason, because you're concerned about their ability to scale, or you're concerned about maybe viability of one of their particular product lines, or you're concerned about one particular piece of technology they use. So that's one reason. Another reason could be performance. So there are certain types of workloads that in a public cloud maybe that don't scale well. If you've got latency requirements, databases actually are a huge area that are still really challenging to scale in a meaningful way beyond terabytes. But if we start talking about petabytes, it becomes really challenging for certain types of databases to work well in the public cloud, but couldn't work well in, say, a private cloud or a data center co-location type scenario where you're still running bare metal. And you have a lot more control over what type of hardware is being used, and there's no shared platform underneath it. Cost as well. A lot of the public cloud providers can scale to really large proportions, and the bills go along with those scaled proportions. Whereas oftentimes we can come up with much more affordable solutions that are based on top of colo or private cloud scenarios. So, yeah.
Makes sense. Now, you kind of brought this up a little bit before, where some organizations, they just kind of like go into it not realizing how much it's going to cost. But it sounds like are organizations also using this as an excuse to say, hey, you know what? We are on this older technology. We're already co-located. We want to move to the cloud. Let's do that so we can upgrade all of our technology and move forward.
Sure. I think that's a secondary consideration in most cases. Usually if an organization is looking at moving to the cloud, there's some other driver there. It's either there's a shortcoming to potentially some piece of technology they have today, or they're looking to leverage the scalability that public clouds offer, or they're looking to leverage, say, the APIs, and they want full automation for all of their infrastructure that they're going after. There's usually some primary driver that I think comes before the need to potentially do a hardware or technology refresh. In contrast, I think really what ends up happening then is that they look at it as an opportunity or a justification then to defend that position to move to one of the cloud solutions. And it's sort of like, well, hey, if we move to AWS, for example, well, then we don't need to spend $3 million on refreshing our infrastructure that we've got in the data center. So I think it's usually a secondary driver, or it's being used as sort of a business justification point to then further support the cause of moving to one of the public cloud providers.
Makes sense. Now, we brought this up in a little bit where you said, hey, some organizations, they like to use hybrid clouds because it does actually offer more cost-effective ways of implementing things, but they are challenged with things like governance and so on. But what about like cloud sprawl? Like how can organizations, they can get into a situation where they're using too many cloud services. How can organizations prevent this? Like what are they doing to actually assist in this?
Yeah, that's a huge problem. I would say that a majority of the enterprises that we run into are suffering from this to some degree. And the larger the organization and the more decentralized the organization, the tougher the problem is to solve. So having a strong cloud governance program in place is pretty key. And that is, establishing what are the rules around cloud consumption. What are the conditions in which we decide to use the cloud? What are the approval steps to use it? And then a huge part of that is forming sort of a committee or a cloud center of excellence that can help govern that, and then communicating that out throughout the organization. Otherwise, what you do end up with is folks, slapping their credit card into one of the online providers, and the next thing you know, they've got infrastructure. So I think it has to come top down. Leadership within the organization has to acknowledge that, hey, this is a legitimate thing, and we need to provide guidance and leadership around how we're going to use these services. I think trying to fight it and say don't use them, you're not really going to get anywhere, because there is this just. There's no friction in the consumption of these services. Amazon and Microsoft and Google have made it so easy, even for developers. Traditionally you have to go to IT, order equipment. There was all kinds of hurdles and stuff like that. Now developers can simply go in, sign up, and start deploying their applications. So it's about putting the policies and procedures in place, but then also establishing a culture where people are rewarded for kind of playing within the ecosystem that the company has created for consuming these services.
Makes sense. Well, when we come back, I'm going to kind of dig into that a little bit more. But before we do, we have to thank another great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that is Wasabi Hot Cloud Storage. Now, I've actually used Wasabi. They're simply awesome. You might say that with cloud storage, is the more expensive they get is like the more you store in it, the more times you access it or perform operations on it, it gets more expensive. Well, in this day and age, a lot of the cloud storage providers out there, that's how they work. Plus, a lot of the competition today is seeing how low they can go to make their storage fees and ingress fees low. But from experience, I can tell you that if you try to go cheaper on some of the cloud systems, you give up performance and reliability as well. Well, Wasabi Hot Cloud Storage has a way to fix all of these things. Now, if you're doing small projects all the way up to the large enterprise projects, Wasabi seems to have figured it all out. Listen to this game changer. When you use them, you have unlimited free egress for your data. There's no charge for any API calls. You don't have to pay for actually the access to your data. Go check it out right now, what you're already spending on cloud storage, because I can tell you, because if you're not having to actually include the egress fees or those API calls, or those, for those CRUD operations, will substantially save you money on the cost of doing business. Now, you're probably thinking, well, if they're cheaper, they must be slower, or they don't have any features or bells or whistles, right? Well, Wasabi has developed some serious disruptive technology here. They found ways to actually pull raw performance out of their storage devices without actually compromising the performance of the device. They have a revolutionary process that actually lays data on disks sequentially, as opposed to the old way of doing it, which is in blocks. Now, what happens with that? Well, that means Wasabi storage is actually 80% cheaper and 6 times faster in some of the industry leaders out there. Now, is your organization worried about compliance? Well, Wasabi has that as well. They are HIPAA, FINRA, and CGAS compliant. Now, fast, cheap storage isn't worth much if it isn't secure, right? Well, Wasabi has the answer. Wasabi offers unique feature called immutable buckets. That means that that data cannot be deleted or altered, protecting your valuable data from actually accidental or malicious destruction. Now, if you can't find another service doing that today, I don't think you can, because they also have a 90-day rotating integrity checks and 11 nines. That's 11 nines of durability. Now, are you worried about data migration? Well, Wasabi has an answer there as well. They have the Wasabi Ball Transfer Appliance. This thing is powered by Netgear and is designed to transfer super large data sets while dramatically reducing your costs. Now, you might be already on cloud storage right now, or your organization is probably trying to store data on-premise or hybrid to save money, or maybe they're just trying to move to the cloud. With Wasabi, you'll basically be rethinking all of your approaches. Data storage is all Wasabi does. They are experts, and it's their passion. They believe in a world of rapidly escalating cloud storage needs, that progress depends on cloud storage being more like utility with fast, affordable storage available in endless supply. They truly understand the needs of enterprises, so they don't have things like egress fees. Calculate savings for yourself and start with a free trial of unlimited storage for a month. Go to wasabi.com, click the free trial link, and enter the code ENTERPRISE. Join the movement and migrate your data to the cloud with confidence. Go to wasabi.com and make sure to use the offer code ENTERPRISE. And we thank Wasabi for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, folks, we're talking to Eric Dynowski, CTO of ServerCentral, about cloud, hybrid cloud, private cloud. I actually want to bring in my co-host because they have some questions about security and compliance. They have a really good set of enterprise questions as well. I'm going to start with Heather. Heather, you had some questions about, I think it was hybrid cloud or compliance. Couldn't remember.
Actually, neither, but that's okay.
Oh, neither of those.
But
one of those days, I'm telling you.
That's all right. Because actually, it's one of those days for me too. Because this is a really cool topic for me, if only because I'm sort of well known for being a control freak. So for me, I'm a little. The jury's been out for me a lot on the cloud. I don't see anything wrong with just spinning up a VM on a server that I have at hand. I'm sorry if that makes me anathema right now, but my question is about, and it goes back to, because over this year, we've had a number of conversations about the rise of ransomware. In fact, we talked a little bit about it earlier today, and that was on purpose. And I'd like to know the role that a good cloud infrastructure disaster recovery plan can play in helping solve. We've had more than 25 to date municipalities. This isn't counting schools and universities that have been hit, but just municipalities in just the U.S. that have been shut down with ransomware. We just had another university, a multi-state university, that was shut down in the last 2 days. Is having a cloud infrastructure and a disaster recovery plan through that a panacea, given that apparently we're not solving the problem in other ways?
Well, a disaster recovery plan is a good idea, regardless of ransomware, and something you should have. But I think having a well thought out one is definitely a good start. But I would say having a well thought out plan only gets you like 25% of the way there. Actually having executed on it is a huge plus. And we've run into many organizations that have documented disaster recovery plans that have never been tested, have never actually been deployed. So I think having a documented disaster recovery plan is a huge step. Verifying and running through tests and actually saying, hey, we're gonna pretend that we're in the middle of a disaster, that we've lost access to data. Can we recover the data? and run through some actual scenarios on a regular basis to verify that your DR plan's working as expected. We've had customers that have suffered from ransomware attacks, and we've been successful in recovering their data without having to, pay the ransom or whatever was going on in those particular cases. The cloud services coming from, say, AWS and Google and Azure actually make that quite easy to do. Whether you're backing up to another account within those providers, replicating data that you've got to those, whether we're moving to object storage like S3 or you're snapshotting your volumes, it makes recovery a lot simpler and much quicker, and gives you an option to get your data back without actually necessarily having to pay the ransom. So I would say that even if you don't have a robust documented plan, but you have regular snapshots or regular copies of your data going to object storage provided by these cloud providers, it gives you a lot of flexibility. Additionally, because you can get multiple accounts and control how you replicate your data. If one account becomes compromised, the likelihood that the other account got compromised is much lower. So your ability to recover data is a lot higher. And since it's so simple to leverage those services, I would say that the public cloud providers allow or make that dealing with that challenge a lot easier.
That's great. And actually, I'm going to bring in a question from the chat room. That's a follow up to something you were talking about. Specs wants to know: does testing the plan require additional machine resources, like in the hybrid cloud scenario?
It really depends on what kind of DR plan you've got. In some cases, if you're running hot and you're running databases that you're replicating to in real time, testing the plan may not necessarily require additional compute capabilities. If you're running sort of a hot-cold scenario and you want to test, allowing users to log in, bringing your applications up for real. If you want to do load testing in the DR environment, then yes, it would require additional resources. The great thing about some of the hyperscale cloud options is that you have the flexibility to add those resources on a temporary basis without commitment or huge cost. So if you're running, say, a large 500 terabyte database, you want to go through a DR scenario, you don't have to, make sure you have 500 terabytes of disk on hand, that you went out and purchased. You can provision it, restore your database, bring it online, run some test queries to verify that the data is there and as you expect, and then shut it down. And maybe you've only paid for, 3 days of storage while you did your test, and then you can spin it down and delete it. But it really does depend on what your DR strategy looks like and how you are replicating data and how you're storing data and what your applications require.
Okay, so I've just got to ask this one last question because Curtis is in the background nodding about you're talking about DR testing is critical and done far too few times. I'm falling out of my chair as you're talking about these people have you've seen DR plans that exist essentially on paper only and but not in reality. At this point, well, I'm stuck with the "you can't fix stupid" sentences in my head. But is there a way to sort of cookie cutter or write a cookbook that helps some of these guys that don't understand that no plan survives contact with the enemy?
I think there are. One of the great things that has come out of public cloud services coming to be and them being sort of an API first type of service is that the number of integration and automation tools that have come out in the last 4 or 5 years is just astounding. And there's a lot of really cool and powerful tools out there so that as opposed to DR plans simply being something that's documented on paper, they could be built out more as a kind of infrastructure as code and deployed, and you can build tests directly into your code. So in the same way that developers classically would build unit tests for their code and run their entire code base through tests before it's deployed for bugs, we can begin to design disaster recovery and compliance programs in a similar way. So from that end, for a lot of our customers, we run a lot of automated compliance tests. We run a lot of automated best practice checks that can catch a lot of things that would cause problems or deletion of data or disasters to occur, oftentimes maybe before they occur. So today, as we work with a lot of the organizations that we work with, and especially as we roll them into our managed service programs, we build their disaster recovery programs around automation and tooling and try to make doing those tests a lot simpler and a lot more cost effective. So rather than organizations not, documenting their plans but not acting on them, if we remove some of the friction with acting and supporting those disaster recovery plans, the likelihood that we'll be able to recover is a lot higher.
Fantastic. Well, I do want to throw this over to Curtis because he is chomping at the bit about the DR question, as well as, we had some questions about configuration too, right?
I did, and I'm going to wrap both of them in a larger blanket of personnel and skills, because when you're talking about rehearsing disaster recovery, basically you're talking about giving the IT staff the hands-on skills to deal with it if the worst actually happens. And in that larger sense, I've heard people in the cloud world say that while companies often hope that cloud applications will be a solution to the problem that they have getting trained IT people, in actuality, they require just as many, just somewhat different skills. What are you seeing in your customer base? Is a skills gap slowing down some of the effective transition to the cloud?
Hey, Curtis. Yeah, that problem is definitely spans much broader than just, say, the scope of disaster recovery like we've been talking about. The skills gap is real. There's no doubt about that. That's partly why we exist, and why we're here. Our customers are coming to us either because they don't have the skills or talent in-house, or for business reasons they don't necessarily want to have them in-house, and they're looking for a trusted partner to help them navigate sort of their cloud journey, to use a buzzword. And it's a problem that we've faced as well. As a company that offers cloud solutions, from building out a private cloud for a customer to building a cloud native application to a customer, the skill set needed is completely different today than it was just 2 years ago or even 5 years ago. Insofar as it's created a situation where we've had to almost kind of build our own in-house university, for trying to train staff and build up staff, because they don't exist out in the marketplace today. And if they do, they probably have a great job. So it's a major problem. And I would say that in the context of disaster recovery, the same skills needed to build out an environment within DR, within the public cloud, is the same skill set needed to recover and operate it during a recovery scenario. So it's kind of the same problem. I don't think that building an application or hosting a workload within one of the public clouds providers completely eliminates the need for particular skills or talents.
Well, when you're talking about these skills and talents, we've seen over the last 6 months several very public data breaches that have really occurred because of misconfigured S3 buckets. It always seems to be an S3 bucket in the public ones, but we know that it's possible, given just a little bit of gumption, to misconfigure pretty much any cloud service out there. Have these very public misconfiguration issues informed your customers at all? I mean, do they start asking questions, or are they being more knowledgeable, or are they still coming to you hoping that you can answer questions that they don't even know how to ask? Yeah,
the misconfiguration issue is a big problem, but it's not a new problem. I think that security historically, over the last 20 years, many breaches, many leaks, many compromises all have resulted from mistakes either developers made or infrastructure people made. So I think that's not a new problem. I think that what is a new problem is that the consumption of these, what we'll term infrastructure services within the cloud, being so easy or automatable, making the mistakes is now easier to do. And the mistakes could get hidden inside code where they're not necessarily so obvious. What automation and APIs have done is allowed us to make mistakes at scale. And our customers are absolutely coming to us. We work with a lot of sensitive information from private sector customers to government, and whether it's election data or customers, PII information. Our customers are aware of misconfiguration issues, and they're asking us, "What are you doing about it?" when you're helping us with our workloads. And to answer that is, you can train people all day long to stop making mistakes, and you'll never succeed. People will make mistakes, and it's built into our nature. So our approach to it has been to automate the detection of classical mistakes to the greatest extent possible, is kind of the first piece of it. So for all of the environments that we manage with our customers, we run routine checks across those environments that look for obvious mistakes that somebody might make in the configuration. So, for example, if we're managing a customer workload in AWS, one of the checks that we run is, hey, do you have publicly open S3 buckets? And do you want them to be open? And we'll notify customers, that they do have these buckets out there. So hopefully we catch them before the data leaks out. We'll check firewall rules and security groups to make sure that there isn't something in there that says, hey, allow traffic on port 80 and 443, but block everything else. And then we put a rule at the bottom that says allow all. So we try to automate, checks like that across the board so that we can mitigate mistakes and find them, before somebody with alternative intentions finds them. And then I think there's some interesting trends happening as well. The public cloud providers have acknowledged that this is a real problem. And one of the ways you see that, for example, is like if you log into Amazon now and create an S3 bucket, as opposed to defaulting to having public access open, it now defaults to having no public access. And if you try to enable public access, it makes it really hard, to do so. So the interfaces are changing, and sort of being much more restrictive and forcing people to really think about what they're doing to hopefully mitigate some of these mistakes.
We've been talking with Eric Dynowski from ServerCentral. Thank you so much for being on the show. Unfortunately, we're running a little low on time, but Eric, I wanted to give you a chance to tell the folks at home where you can find more information about ServerCentral, cloud migration, disaster recovery, operations management, and more. Where can they go, and how can they get started?
Absolutely. Well, probably the easiest place to go is our website, which is servercentral.com. And you can contact us through there. And I think a lot of our contact information is also publicly available on the internet, but the best place to go is the website or sales@servercentral.com.
Fantastic. Well, folks, you've done it again. You sat through another hour of the Best Dang Enterprise podcast in the universe, according to 9 out of 10 hybrid cloud sprawls. I want to thank everyone who makes this show possible, especially my co-hosts in crime, starting with our very favorite security journalist, Mr. Curtis Franklin. Curtis, where can the folks find you and all of your work?
Well, as always, people can find my work over at darkreading.com. I'll point to it through my Twitter handle, KG4GWA, or on Instagram at Curt_Franklin. Getting ready to head out to Las Vegas in just a couple of weeks, getting some previews done, talking to people about all kinds of exciting stuff that I'm going to be covering. And I would love to hear from the Twilight Riot if there are questions they have about what's going to be happening at Black Hat. And if they're going to be at Black Hat or DEF CON, look me up. I'll be fairly easy to find at either place.
Thanks, Curtis. Well, we also have to thank our very own Heather Mo Williams. Heather, where can the folks find you and all of your work?
Well, I guess I'm Curtis's doppelganger today. You can find me on Twitter at Mo Better Wi-Fi. But in the next couple of, in about 6 weeks, you'll be able to find me. No, not 6. Oh, I wish it was 6 weeks. In a couple of weeks, you can find me in Vegas at both Black Hat and DEF CON. I will be in the knock. So while his dance card is filling up, I will take tribute of coffee in exchange for the Wi-Fi PSK. And I'm also not that hard to find. I'll be the one running up and down, planting access points like I'm creating an orchard.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for being here. Well, we also want to thank you as well. You are the person who drops in each and every week. You're our loyal listener and our loyal follower. You come in and get each and every week, and you get your enterprise goodness from us. And we want to make it easy for you to watch and listen to the show. So go out right now to our show page, twit.tv/Twiat. There you'll find all of the information about our back episodes, show notes, information about the guests, the co-hosts, as well as information and links to our stories that we do during the show. But more importantly, next to those videos there, you'll actually see the helpful download and subscribe links. Support the show by getting the audio version, the video version, the HD video version of your choice, and listen in on any one of your devices. It's really the best way to stay on top of your enterprise news for the week. So go ahead and subscribe and join the show. Now, after you subscribe, share the show with your coworkers, share the show with your friends, your family. If you subscribe, you remember, if you do subscribe, you're actually supporting the show, and we can continue to do it each and every week. Now, remember, we actually do the show live as well each week, 1:30 p.m. Pacific time on Fridays. And you can watch the show live at live.twit.tv. And of course, if you're going to come watch the show live, might as well jump into the chat room live as well. There, we actually get some great questions in there. There's some great characters. That's irc.twit.tv. We love the chat room. We always get some really good discussions in there. So don't forget to jump in there as well. Now, also, don't forget, you can follow me at twitter.com/LouMM. There you get to see what I do at my normal daily job at Microsoft, as well as you can also check out dev.office.com. It's really where we post the latest and greatest ways to customize your Office experience and make it more productive for you. I also want to thank everyone who makes this show possible, especially to Leo and Lisa. They continue to support This Week in Enterprise Tech each and every week. We couldn't do this show without them. Also, thank you everyone at Twit, especially all the engineers at Twit. And of course, thank you again to Mr. Brian Cheebert. He is also not only our co-host in crime sometimes, but he's also our tireless producer as well. He does all the background things, the bookings, the plannings. He gets all of them kind of set up and ready to go and gets the show structured for us. Thank you for him and all of his hard work. And of course, thank you. Before we sign out, we have to thank our TD for today, Victor. Of course, you know the tradition, Victor. What was the topic of today's show?
I actually have two. One, I have to find my wired mice and keyboard again. Yeah. It's somewhere in storage somewhere. And two, for Heather, it's a good thing our colors are green to go with her networking green thumb. Planting Wi-Fi.
Nice job, Victor. Nice job. I would say very close, very close. It was hybrid cloud sprawls, but I would say you were super close. Maybe next time, Victor. Thank you so much.
This is what I was trying to pull up. Like, we have the green lights and everything in the studio. You guys were
okay,
here.
that's just creepy.
That's Heather planning Wi-Fi there.
That's what it represents? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, folks, until next time, I'm Louis Maresca, just reminding you, if you want to know what's going on in the enterprise, just keep quiet.